All right. Well, good. So yeah, Jeremy, you wrote this great article, How to Read More Books in 2023, and you've got a lot of interest in that. It's something I always hear from people, and they're curious of the process, and I've always been curious as well. Just how do different people read? How do they prepare? How do they choose their books? How do they set a routine and all that? And in your article, you captured a lot of these things. And so when I was reading through, I was agreeing on a lot of it. And then I was on other parts, I was thinking, yeah, I do things a little differently here. So
Sure.
you reached out, and I thought it'd just be fun to talk through our different routines and ask each other questions along the way using your article
Yeah.
as a template. So
Yeah. Yeah.
anything
Perfect.
you want to share before we get into it?
Sure. I mean, yeah, just thanks for having me. I've been following your books of Titans for quite a while. And like you, I've kind of at times I've kind of agreed with your approach and other times diverged from your approach. So yeah, I think it's fun when we get readers together to talk about our reading habits and yeah, how we pick books. I think you and I operate, especially on that point, a little bit differently. But I've kind of seesawed through the years as well, and it's always changing, especially this year for me. So yeah, I'm excited to talk books and reading.
Nice. Nice. So you start off the article with your routine. You want to just
Yeah,
give a highlight, and then I can give a highlight of my daily routine.
yeah, absolutely. So I've been reading, just kind of context. I've been reading roughly 100 books a year for over a decade. I've been keeping track of all that in a Google spreadsheet, and it's super fun to add a new tab once we hit the new year, like we just did a couple weeks ago. So of course, it's a lot of books. It's a lot of pages. It's roughly 2 books a week that I finish. And the biggest question I get is what does your reading day look like? I have 3 young kids, ages 7 and under. I have a full-time job. I do my newsletter thing on the side. So how do I fit in all that time for reading? And then when I lay it out, it doesn't seem so crazy, right? When you actually add up the minutes, it's not as intense as it might seem. So the biggest thing that I've been doing, really the entire time I've been an adult, is I wake up early. My alarm is set 7 days a week for somewhere in the 5 o'clock hour, and I make a cup of coffee and I sit in bed with a book until roughly 6:30 or 7, until the kids are awake. So right away, that's what, 45 minutes to an hour of reading, very first thing in the morning. And that sets up my day beautifully. Like just even on like a mental, emotional level, it kind of fuels me up. And I have always been someone who prefers to get up and have some calm, even if it takes effort before the kids are awake. I'm not someone who wants to wake up with, screaming kids in their face at 7 a.m. So yeah, I've been choosing to get up early for a long time, and that's made a huge difference. So that's 45 to 60 minutes right off the bat. Throughout the course of the workday, and even through school pickups and stuff, I'll sneak in another 2 to 3 or 4 10 to 15 minute chunks of reading. When I need a work break, I'm going to grab a book instead of scrolling Instagram. That adds up to another, 30, maybe even 40 minutes a day. And then at the end of the day, my wife and I will read in bed for 30 minutes before I yell at Alexa to turn the lights off. And so there's another, 30 plus minutes. You add all that up, it's what, roughly 90 minutes, maybe a couple hours on a good day. 100 pages an hour sometimes if it's a novel, a little less than that if it's nonfiction. And it pretty quickly adds up to 2 books a week. So again, when you say, I'm reading 2 hours a day, it sounds like a lot, but when it's broken up, it doesn't seem so crazy. I'm not watching as much TV at night as maybe some people. But I say that not to be holier than thou, but to say that I really would rather read a book than watch TV. And so we end up, both my wife and I, we read a lot more than we do other forms of media. And so that's how you get to roughly 100 a year.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love the one thing you said, that first out, you're just busy. Like you've
Yeah,
got a lot going on. And
yeah,
I think a lot of people assume if someone's reading a lot of books that maybe they're not working, or they have like a really easy job or something, or just, like
Yeah.
you have a lot of time, and that's really not the case. And I'm in a similar boat to you, married, two kids, young kids, 5 and 8, full-time job. I've got like other side project type things. And so, yeah, there's not like this huge amount of time that I have every day just to read. But I love how you said it's a habit, and especially in your article, you talked about it being a habit, and
Yeah.
habits are built. And obviously, you've had it for 10 years. I started Books of Titans in 2017, so I've done it 6 years now, and yeah, it's like I miss it, and I love how you said too in the morning, like if you don't do it, you there's an emotional aspect of it, of something
Yeah.
that gives you life, and
Sure.
I feel the same thing. So yesterday morning I did not read. I went to the University of Georgia, and we were in the national championship, so I was up late, and
Oh,
then
sure.
the next morning started, and I didn't get that reading in, and I just kind of felt
Yeah.
that all day. Not that it's going to like destroy a day or something, but like
Right.
it's just I'm same way. I love getting up early. This morning I got up at 4:15. I didn't set the alarm. It's just sometimes I just like, if I go to bed earlier, I'll just kind of naturally wake up, and I love that. And part of that too is you said your kids you're getting up around 6:30. Mine are getting up around 5:30 sometimes. So I almost
Mm,
need to have
rough.
it be
Yeah.
a little earlier just to get that hour in. But yeah,
Yeah.
similar to you, I've got usually have like 30 minutes to an hour in the morning, depending on school schedule with the girls and that sort of thing. So that's a good chunk of my reading time. My daughters are at an age right now where they like someone to be in the room when they're falling asleep. And so what I
Sure.
do is I take my iPhone in, and then just use the flashlight, and I'll set that on like a ledge, and then I'll just have the book under that, and so I can read
Oh,
in their
sure.
room while they're going to sleep. And that between the two of them, that'll add to another 30 minutes to an hour.
Yeah.
Um, Depending on the book, I will potentially read during lunch. But I'm such an active reader that sometimes it's hard, just because I've got the pen in my hand, and
Sure.
I almost need to have more of a focus, not like absolute focus, as you highlight later in your article. Just, sometimes
Yeah.
there's going to be noise going and chaos going around, and you just got to
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
figure out how to do it within that. But yeah, skipping ahead in your article, the thing that is the biggest key to reading a lot is to always carry a book. I just, we'll be out on errands, and maybe one of the kids will fall asleep in the car. And so my wife will just go into the store alone or with our other child. And that's like 30 minutes in the car where I would just be on my phone, if I didn't have a book with me. Uh, just
Yeah.
even, I mean,
Sure.
this sounds nerdy, but like you're in the grocery store, you could have your book with you, and you're in line. It's another 5 minutes. And I that's where you get a lot of reading done, is just in those kind of off hours. But then it's also an issue of training yourself not to first reach for your phone, but to first reach for that book. um
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how I've really embraced in the last couple of years, especially, is just multi-format reading.
yeah.
I think you probably stick to paper, but I've really embraced my Kindle Paperwhite for one-handed reading. It's just so
Mm,
nice, especially for like a big book that's like heavy, and it's like
yeah.
I can't hold a kid and read a big book at the same time, but I can hold a kid and a Kindle at the same time,
Yeah.
which works really well. And even audiobooks, I've just recently been able to get myself into audiobooks. I can still only really do nonfiction, where you don't necessarily need to catch every single word or line to have an idea of what's going on. But yeah, like through the grocery store, I'll have earbuds in to listen to an audiobook, or anytime I'm driving, which is, I think, last year upped my reading number by roughly a book a month, which makes a difference over the course of a year. Um, and even on my phone, if I'm stuck somewhere, I at least have Kindle on my phone. And really, I've kind of curated my Instagram enough to be kind of boring at a stretch longer than 10 minutes, right? Like, I still get sucked in, but I've made it so bookish, my Instagram, kind of funny enough. Like it's, after 10 minutes, I start seeing the same books and just the same, kind of posts. And so then I'm like, oh, I should just read instead. So then I open the Kindle app and it's a little different. So yeah, having kind of that multi-format nature of reading for me has made a really big difference. Or if my wife falls asleep before me, I can pop open my Kindle with its built-in light and I can stay up later or get up earlier or whatever. So I quite appreciate that, particularly in the last couple of years as life has gotten more chaotic. I've figured out how to read beyond just sitting in a spot with a hardback book or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mainly stick to paper. And the main reason is there's just something in my brain to where I can kind of picture a part of the book that so if there's like an idea, and
Yeah.
I can almost picture it, not like photographic or anything, but just I can picture the part of the page it's on. And
Yeah,
then
for sure.
I've always got this pen in my hand, so I'm always like writing, and then that just kind of helps with the interaction. I'm taking notes in the back of the book.
For
So
sure.
I've done a lot of trial and error with this, and I still occasionally will read something on my iPad, but that's mainly like if I'm traveling, and
Sure.
as you said, I just don't want to carry the book with me. But
Yeah.
also just that it syncs across your phone too, so that if you are somewhere where you don't have a book and it's right on your phone, so sometimes I'll kind of go back and forth between an iPad, phone, and an actual book. But I like having the physical book. I like having the physical book also just to be able to look at it, and then
Hmm.
that helps me remember
Definitely.
too, like, hey, this is what this book was about. And then for audio, I love listening to things, but I mainly listen to podcasts,
Okay.
and I'll listen to
Sure.
them when I'm doing work around the house or
Yeah.
running. With books, it kind of goes back to that same visual thing, like,
Yeah.
especially with names, I need to see the names or it
Sure.
just doesn't stick in my brain.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my
Yeah.
my
I hear
wife
you.
will tell you too that I'm not a good listener. So, I I've had to stick with the physical books, but yeah, I just think like, gosh, the truck drivers out there who could just get an Audible
Yeah,
account and go nuts, like,
for
and
sure.
if I mean if that's the way you can learn, like that that is amazing. If you can retain a book listening to it audibly, that's incredible, and more power to you.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure. Yeah, and what's really helped too with embracing the multi-format, because I'm also a note taker. I've just always have naturally reached for a pen when I read something that I like in a book, whether it's a interesting fact or more often some sort of psychological insight or even just like a beautiful sentence in a novel. But I've learned to take those notes on Google Docs on my phone. So
mm,
anytime I come across something in a physical book, I'll either take a picture of like a whole paragraph, or I'll type in the sentence or two that I really like. And so my Google Docs is just filled with book notes, which is great because then it's immediately searchable. It's handy, whereas I always have my phone on me. I don't have to be reaching for a working pen or piece of paper or whatever. So I've really come to enjoy that in the last few years, and it makes then writing about the books a lot easier too, where I can just kind of copy and paste quotes at length or whatever.
mm,
So I've come to quite enjoy that method of note taking for sure.
yeah, that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, let's get into your steps then.
Yeah.
So the first thing you say is there are no right or wrong books. Read what you want. You want to go into that
Yeah.
just a little bit?
Yeah, and that's the one that I think most people struggle with. They have this list of books that they think they should read, whether it's, a list like you would put out, like your reading list for the great books, right? Or it's any other, NPR's top books of the year or whatever. And so, people will just kind of live and die by these various lists. But then what happens is you read something, you don't necessarily enjoy it, and then you get bogged down and your reading slows down and you move on to other things. For me, I've discovered that like it's okay to read what I want to read in the moment. There are no rights or wrongs. And I think school, it's obviously great that school gives us these reading assignments and we read the classics in high school and college, but it also sort of creates this attitude of like you have to read what's assigned, even if you don't enjoy it, and you have to get these thematic things out of it, or else you're not reading it correctly. And so I think as adults, it takes some work to figure out your own reading tastes. I think like interestingly, the last few years, you've gone like from some really heavy books, but then you also put in lighter stuff like Harry Potter, the Wingfeather Chronicles, I think was one that you just finished up recently. Memoirs like Shoe Dog, that stuff is it's kind of all over the board. And I think if you can learn to read the books that you want to read, then you'll be more excited to read, right? It's a very logical statement, but I think it's something that a lot of people just kind of need the permission to do. They need to let themselves do that. Because I think inevitably too, your reading taste will change and grow, right? You can only read so much James Patterson before you get a little tired of it. You're going to move on to something else. Maybe it's more literary, maybe it's not. Either way, I'm kind of the mindset that all reading is beneficial. And so you might as well read what you want.
Yeah. Yeah. There's another big reader on social media, Alex. He calls himself Books with Alex, and he's got this saying,
yeah.
read what you love until you love what you read.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I like that. What is your process then? So let me just take a step back. I define two kind of main methods of selecting books. And one I call the serendipity method of you're reading a book and maybe footnotes or suggested books in the back, or even a book they reference that leads you down a trail. And so it's just kind of this, you started with one book, it's leading you to other books. That could be part of it. Or you just walk into a bookshop and you're like, man, that looks awesome. And so you select that book. So I call that the serendipity approach. The other approach I call kind of a planned approach. What do you fall? What would you say you fall into if it's just those two categories?
Yeah, I would actually say that mine is almost a perfect mix of both, where I tend to really like having a broader plan in mind, but I try to use that plan for maybe only half of my reading. And then I like to leave room for what I like to call just whim, with a capital W, reading at whim, right? What's on my shelf when I'm looking at my bookshelves. I have a number of like big IKEA shelves in the room behind me here. And I'll look at it and I'll say, what is something that just kind of catches my eye for whatever reason? And I'll grab it and start reading. And so I had from roughly 2016 to 2020, I read through biographies of all the presidents. And that was probably only a third of my reading, but those books were often just so big and dense, right, that they took kind of an outsized amount of time compared to my other reading. I would fill in the gaps with just, I reread Harry Potter a couple times in that time period. Lighter stuff that isn't so demanding. Last year, I made it a goal to read more books by women in general. So I read a lot of classics, Little Women, Jane Eyre. What else there? Rebecca was incredible. And so I made a plan of probably, 30 to 40 books. And that was a little less than half of my reading last year. So this year, actually, kind of funny enough, is the first year I don't have a larger plan. And it's making me a little bit crazy. I find myself wanting one. So like I'm kind of going into this year thinking that I'll just read everything at whim. But at the same time, when I've thought about it a little more, I've really been enjoying sci-fi and fantasy reads. Just the world is heavy. I have young kids, there's like this piece of me that wants to just escape into faraway worlds when I'm reading. And so I've considered now, I was kind of going to do it by whim, but of course, just yesterday I found myself making a list of like, oh, what are some like of the sci-fi fantasy classics that I could read this year? So that may end up what I kind of focus on. So yeah, I definitely do like kind of a balance of both, very intentionally.
Yeah. And then how many books are you reading at a time? Do you just stick with one, or do you have a few going?
It's often two. So actually probably three. So one fiction, one nonfiction, of the paper variety, and then usually one audiobook at a time also. And that, like I said, is generally nonfiction on audio. Stuff like memoir or even like true crime is pretty easy to follow for me when I'm doing other things. And even, when I'm reading on my Kindle, it's often an e-version of a paper book that I'm reading, just so I can kind of go between formats, which feels a little
Mhm.
silly to have like multiple copies of the same book, but it works really well. So yeah, I'm most of the time doing one novel and one nonfiction at the same time.
Okay. Yeah. So I'd say before I started the Books to Titans project, I was 100% serendipity approach. And so
Yeah,
just whatever was happening. And the other part of that is I probably had like 5 books going at a time. So they're just,
sure.
I have like a stand where I keep my books, and there'd be 5 on there at any given time.
Yeah.
For when I started Books of Titans, I did 2 big changes. One was I planned out what I was going to read. And then the second was I only did 1 book at a time.
Yeah.
So the planning out was really more for, so I read Tools of Titans by Tim Ferriss, and then he just kind of goes through all this podcast episodes where he asks these guests who are top performers in a variety of fields, what's your favorite book and what's your most gifted book? So while I
Yeah.
was reading that book, I just made a list of those, and I was like, man, I want to read all these. And I think at
Yeah.
the end it was like 120 books that were suggested. And so
Nice.
I was like, how can I get through these quickly? And so I
Yeah.
just figured, like, let me just make a list of them, because I know I want to read all these. And then one thing that I did, and I don't know why I did this, but I've done it every year since, is I then randomized the order. So
Oh,
I
okay.
so I had like a huge selection of books I wanted to read. I narrowed
Yeah.
that down to 52, so I would do one a week.
Okay.
And that was kind of a challenge, because before that, the most I'd ever read in a year was like 30. So I
Okay.
knew this would be a challenge. I knew I'd have to make changes in my life, maybe like stop reading news,
Yeah.
limiting TV, that kind of thing. And then I randomized the order, and the main reason is, if I had chosen the order, I would have, even unconsciously, I would have packed the books I was most excited about at the very beginning.
Sure.
And so I think just by that act of randomizing, it just
Yeah.
helped it like keep it fresh the whole year. And I
For
was not in
sure.
charge of the order that I read them. The
Yeah.
one
Yeah,
book
that
at a
makes sense.
time came about because, again, it's just kind of a limitation in my head. If I have more than 1 book going, and especially if they're on even somewhat similar topics, I have
Sure.
a hard time remembering which book it came from.
Yeah.
And if I can remember what content came from what book, it just helps me to remember the book better as a
Yeah, that
whole.
makes sense.
And then there's also this aspect of it, of if it was just one at a time, I would have to get through it in order to finish it.
Yeah.
In order to
Make
get
yourself
to
kind
the,
of a hard rule. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, get to the next book, which leads to your second point here of don't be afraid to give up or hit pause. So this is
Yeah.
one that we differ on a little bit, but I think it's due to our approaches. So
Yeah,
you
probably.
start on this, and then I'll share why I just do why I
Yeah.
don't give up books.
Yeah, yeah. So the plan approach this is kind of related. I think it helps because like when I had this goal to read a biography of every president, um, I knew that like if I didn't have this larger goal in mind, I might read something dry about William Henry Harrison and just want to give up. But I knew that like that future me, right, would have wanted to read all these books in full. So there's some extra motivation there when you have a plan to get through books that even if they're not exciting in the moment, offer a lot of value and will help you grow as a person or provide to your knowledge base or whatever. So I definitely think there's some value in continuing hard books when you don't want to, especially when you have a larger goal in mind. If you're not someone who has like a reading plan or a reading goal, quit at will is kind of my own philosophy there. Like, why not? Right? Life is too short to read books that are just dragging you down, especially if you're someone who kind of struggles with picking up the habit anyway. I would say if something isn't catching your attention, if you're not excited to pick it up and read it, pause, right? I do that a lot where I'll even recognize that like this book is probably really good. For the whatever reason, this moment in my life, it's not working. I'm going to put it back on my shelf, pick it up again sometime later. And it's often even, years later, I'll pick up a book that I know I hit pause on Sometimes I'll restart it. Sometimes I leave the bookmark in and just start from where I left off and try to remember, as much as I can. I just did that with a 700-page biography of Ted Kennedy that I started a year or two ago. I got a few hundred pages in, got slowed down. I picked it up towards the end of 2022 here, finished it, really enjoyed it. And sometimes that just happens. And so I am definitely an advocate. If something is not resonating with you, put it down, especially, like I said, if your goal is to read more books, if you have a hard time with it anyway, you really should be reading something that you're excited to pick up anytime you have a chance, right? If you're not excited to read it, then you're going to reach for the TV remote or you're going to reach for your smartphone way more easily, and you're going to have to exert more willpower just to pick up the book. I think there are generally better uses of your willpower. So I say, yeah, quit at will. Any and often, I know. I really appreciate this rule that Ryan Holiday follows. I know he got it from somewhere else, is to do the number 100 minus your age. If you get to that page count, you're not into it, put the book down. So, if I get 70, 65 pages into a book and I'm not into it, I'm happy to put it down.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm glad you made that distinction. If you don't have a plan,
Yeah.
because when I was doing the serendipity approach pre 2016, I would not give up a book. And that was not a good thing. I wish
Sure.
I wish I would have given up books that weren't, because I would just try to force my way through it. And like you
Sure.
said, then then it becomes an issue of willpower, and you're
Right.
going to lose
Yeah.
that battle. So, yeah. So on the serendipity approach, I would definitely say give up. And actually, my rule is I don't stop on books, but I recommend everyone
Sure.
else stop
Yeah.
books.
Yeah. I hear
But
you.
the main reason I say that of not giving up books is because of my approach and that planned approach. So each year I have a notebook. I just call it my everything notebook. And at one of the first pages every year, I just have a page of books, that I come across. And it might be in talking to you. It might be in going to a bookstore. It might be in a newsletter that I receive. There's just, getting book suggestions throughout the year. And I just write every single one of those down. So by the end of the year, I have this huge list of books, and then I choose the 52 that I'm going to read the following year.
Oh,
But
sure.
I've been thinking about these books then the
Yeah,
entire year.
for
So if
sure.
they're on my final list, like, I've done the research, I've talked to people who have read them, I've
Yeah.
wanted to read them, or they've been a book that I've wanted to read forever. So my not quitting or stopping a book if I'm not enjoying it, I've already put in that time of, like, I know I want
Right.
to read this book, and
Yeah,
I know if I quit early, I might miss something that is really good at the end. And that's
for sure.
happened multiple times with the project of just, you almost have to read it to the end to get the good stuff. Um, but I say all that, and the last year, 2022, I did give up 2 books, and
Okay.
I stopped them early, and then just picked another book. And for me, it's going to be on the content side of it's just content that I don't want in my head. I will quit a book early. And so that
Sure.
was the case last year. There were 2 books in particular I just stopped early. Um, and so, yeah, so even with that hard rule, like, I I, I did make a
Yeah.
few concessions last year.
Was one of them the Civil War series by Shelby Foote?
Well, that was 2 years ago, and that
Okay.
was more. I did give that up, but that was I just ran out of time, and
Sure.
they were so big. So
So
I
here's,
read the
yeah.
first of the 3 books.
I also
Yeah,
have the trilogy, and I have you can see a bookmark stuck in there, a few hundred pages in that
yeah,
I tried a couple years ago, and it's one of those where, like, man, it's really good, but it's dense. Oh man,
yeah, yeah,
it's like trying to wrap your head around all of it. So for me, I know that, like, okay, I tried reading this when we had like a newborn, almost 2 years ago. It's like, man, I didn't have the headspace for it. So it's sitting
yeah.
on my desk, and someday I'll get to it. But I think I need a little more headspace, kids to be a little older. So yeah, there's definitely some books like that for me.
Yeah, and one of your rules we'll get into is just flexibility, and I think that's the key in everything. And So yeah, there have been, I mean, I've got that plan in place, and then I randomize the order, and I just try to go straight through that order, one book at a time. And that's worked really well for me.
Yeah,
But I will also move stuff around. Like, as you say, if it's just a really heady time with work, or
yeah,
just super crazy with family, or things like,
yep,
or even like if I know a trip is coming up and it's like I've got a series coming up, I don't want to get like right in the middle of the series and then leave for the trip, just because when I travel, I might have one day where I can read 200 pages, like if I'm at the airport and all that, but I might have another
yeah,
day where I'm not reading any.
for
And that
sure.
becomes really hard for me if it's a book that I really need to be paying attention. And
Yep,
so I might wait for that book until after the trip, and then just maybe put like a easier nonfiction where you can just kind of read 200 pages one day, not read it for a day or so, and then, pick back up pretty easily. So
yeah,
yeah,
for
I,
sure.
I move around that way as well.
Yeah,
Well, good. The next one is always have a book on hand. We mentioned this. This is,
yep,
I mean, that's like the number one rule. I've tried to ingrain that in my daughters as well, and they've
yeah,
started carrying books with them. So that's
for sure.
but yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean that's part of, having learned to read on my phone is part of that. Or to, always have multiple options for books, especially in the house, no matter what room I end up in, there will be a book there somewhere. So
Yeah.
even if, I don't have the book that I'm currently reading on hand, I might pick something else up and flip through a few pages just to exercise that muscle, and to exercise that habit a little bit.
Yeah.
To always reach for a book first. Yeah, I think, that's like the kind of the simplest and also probably like the most impactful tip there is just like to train yourself to always reach for a book first, and that of course means always having a book on hand. Yeah,
Yeah. Number four, you've got read in a group. So tell me the types of groups that you've been in. I know you kind
yeah,
of run a Substack group as well.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So the gist of this, of reading in a group, is just to give yourself some accountability. So for me, so I have a newsletter, readmorebooks.co, where I send out a newsletter every Friday and I review a couple of books. And for me, it's accountability of like, okay, I have to kind of keep reading all the time, or I'm not going to have a newsletter, right? There's like a little bit of motivation to always keep reading, which helps. And I think the same thing can happen within a group. So I'm part of a physical book club here, with a group of friends of about 10 of us who meet once a month to read a book. There's always going to be, one or two people who didn't finish the book, but for most people, there's a little bit of motivation, right? Even if it's low stakes, there's motivation to read the book in a way that you wouldn't have otherwise, right? When you're talking about it. And I also have an online book club, like you said, so that's the bigread.substack. And what's great about that is you get people that are kind of out of your own social sphere. And I think when you read in a group, that really like the biggest benefit outside of just the accountability piece is that you get a different point of view on what you're reading, right? It's like everyone is coming into a book with a different experience, a different worldview. There's that saying, you never step in the same river twice. I think it's kind of the same with books, right? In a similar way, no book is the same for each person, right? Everyone is bringing
Mhm.
all of their stuff into that book, even their life experience at that time, right? Reading Harry Potter now at age 35 is way different than when I read Harry Potter for the first time when I was, in my late teens. Um, and so I think having a group to talk about a book can really change how you see it. And sometimes, in our book club, whether in person or online, you get through a book and you have certain ideas about it, but then you talk about it and maybe your perspective of the book kind of goes up. Maybe you see it as in higher regard after you've talked about it. Or maybe people point out some criticisms that you hadn't thought of before and you realize, oh yeah, this could have been done better. Or the story goes a little off the rails here, and maybe you think a little less of it after that. So I think being able to like just grow in how you see a book is a huge part of that too. So yeah, I love the various groups I'm part of. I also I enjoy doing buddy reads, which is kind of a Bookstagram thing where you just pick like one buddy to read a book with instead of doing it as part of a larger club. So I have a buddy in Iowa who I'll read a book with just one-on-one, roughly once a month, and we'll just talk on the phone about it or FaceTime about it. And it's a ton of fun. So I think, yeah, finding a way to make the reading more accountable while also making it like more fun and worldview expanding is such a benefit. I think if you're not part of a book club, you definitely should be. So just like I said too, it's just like it's a lot of fun to talk books with other people. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'll put a plug in here too for the Catherine Project. Have you heard of that?
I haven't, no.
So Catherine Project, they have a website and then they're on Twitter as well. And it's free to join, and they do Zoom meetings like this, but it's a lot of it's on the classics. I actually signed up
Okay.
one for about an opera as well.
Okay.
So they did one on
Cool.
Mozart's Marriage of Figaro, but I signed up for one that was on First and Second Samuel of the Hebrew Bible, and yeah, just kind of like what you were saying, it was people from all over the world, but it's limited too. There's only like 15 people max. But
Oh,
yeah, just the
interesting.
different perspectives. And I mean, there were some people who, were PhDs in the Bible, and then there were some people who just, were very interested in it. But everyone
Sure.
brought a lot to the table. And so yeah, the Catherine Project is a great place to start if you're listening and just want to get in some sort of a group. I've enjoyed
Yeah,
those. You
interesting.
just sign up for their newsletter, and then you got to sign up quick once they release the
Sure.
courses because they fill up. But yeah, that was excellent.
Huh.
And then that's something with so 2023 is a transition year for me where I'm going from phase 1 to phase 2 of this reading project. Phase 2 is going to be where I read through 200 of the great books. And so one thing I'm doing is I'm going to try to have like at least one call per book.
Okay.
And so I've had people say that they're interested, not necessarily in reading all of the books, but in kind of picking and choosing along the way. And
Sure.
then,
Yeah.
so yeah, I'm thinking of just having, and maybe I'll do it in person with the bookstore where I'm business manager here. I may do it in person there, but then also have kind of a Zoom feed going from the
Sure.
physical location. But yeah, there's a lot of power in that, in that discussion. And then
Yeah.
you're going to get things out of it that you wouldn't have. And yeah, just that different perspective too. There's a Murakami. I did a podcast episode on this, but there's this quote by Murakami that really bugs me, Haruki
Mm.
Murakami. And it bugs me because everyone quotes it as him saying it, but it was a character in his book that said it. And
Okay.
it's something along the lines, if you read all the books that everyone else is reading, you'll think the same things as everyone else is thinking. And
Okay.
I couldn't disagree more, but in really
Yeah.
because of what you were saying, where everyone brings their own life experience. And when
Yeah.
I talk to people about a book, I often wonder if we read the same book because
Yeah.
they get something so completely different. And so,
For
yeah, the
sure.
power of just talking. And for me, one of the reasons I started the Books of Titans project is my close friend group was not into reading. And so if I was
Yeah.
going to pursue this, I needed to pursue connections outside of that group.
For
And
sure.
you may need to as well if you want to become someone who's reading. And so there's tons of groups out there. You could start with Jeremy's, you could look into the Catherine Project. But yeah, try, I think that's a great solution.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So next up, you have Be Flexible, and we've talked about that a little bit. Anything else that comes to mind on the Be Flexible, because you've got two parts on that.
Yeah. So yeah, the first part is that the perfect environment is elusive. So we have kind of talked about that. And I love the story about Bruce Lee. So I don't think people would think of Bruce Lee and being a big reader, but he read voraciously. And there's this stories of him with his kids, practicing martial arts in the house, and his friends over and things are crazy. But Bruce would be able to just sit on the floor peacefully with a book and just kind of tune everything out around him and still keep reading. So I have tried to kind of cultivate that where, if kids are watching a loud movie, or, what's often the case is like our kids will be like watching three different things on their various tablets or whatever, or someone's making a mess somewhere, and I'll be able to sit on the couch with a book and just kind of tune it all out. And it definitely takes practice, and even an
Yeah.
agreement like with my wife, like we've kind of agreed like the mess is worth it to be able to tune things out for a little bit. If you're not on the same page, that can go awry very quick. But yeah, so that's kind of part one, is that like the perfect environment is elusive. So don't try to like have the perfect environment when you're reading all the time. But then two, I think is important, especially when you're reading classics, is that you don't need to understand fully every word or phrase. I know when you're reading something old and tough, there's like, I think an instinct. It's like, oh man, I don't understand this word and it's really throwing me off. Or like, I don't get the gist of this paragraph, what's happening here. I need to like read it slower or whatever. But I think what happens is when you just kind of let yourself read through the difficulty, you'll actually end up having understood more than you thought. I think like, especially when you read Shakespeare, a lot of the language is like, just feels discombobulating, right? You're like, what is this even the same language? In some cases it's not, right? There's like outdated usages and patterns of language. But if you just let yourself read through it, like let your eyes read the words without necessarily understanding every single one, you'll get to the end, you realize, oh, I get the gist of that more than I thought I did in the moment. And so when I'm saying be flexible, I think, yeah, the hope is to just give yourself permission to not know every word, to just kind of put in the effort to just keep going, instead of like pausing every time it gets hard. Just keep going, and I promise you'll get more than you think you do, which I'm sure with you like going into the great books. I know that like you're taking down maps and spreadsheets and all that, but is there a part of you where you just kind of have to make yourself keep going to have that experience, or else you get bogged down? Do you kind of feel that at all?
Yeah, and so the book I'm reading right now is the Bible, and I'm just reading it from start to finish. And
Yeah.
I did that for the first time in at the start of 2020,
Okay.
and read it in 2 months. So I'm trying to do the same thing. And I
Yeah.
actually, with the great books, I want to try to do that every year, where I just start the year in January and February reading through a different version, different translation
Oh,
of the
sure.
Bible. But that's a key point of how I'm reading it. And this was actually my favorite point that you made in your article here is I'm writing questions in the margin, but I'm
Yeah.
not stopping, and I'm not. There's been a
Sure.
few occasions where I'll look something up in Google, but it's mainly more to understand what's going on, to help me understand the whole context. But
Sure.
instead, what I'm doing is writing the questions in the margin, and then what happens, and I think you see this happen a lot with the classics, and especially with the Bible, is like
Yeah.
the answers will actually be later on. So if
Sure.
I had
Yep.
taken the time to stop, open up Google, look for the answer, it wouldn't have been as a satisfying answer as actually coming across it later. Or in the
Sure.
case of like characters, if you forget a character name or a person's name and it comes up later, then like you'll remember it. And so yeah, just
Right.
that
For sure.
aspect of just continuing on, I think is powerful, because you will notice things, and the more you get bogged down, um, there's almost a power in that continuity of just working your way through something straight. And you can always
Yeah.
go back and like do further research. And so even with these questions I'm writing in the margins in the Bible, I've thought, maybe later on I can just kind of go in order of those questions if I don't have a answer I think is sufficient.
Yeah.
But I don't want to get bogged down in just considering that question.
For
And then
sure.
for your first part of the environment, it reminds me of a story that I read in the biography of Frederick Douglass, and he
Oh,
was
sure.
sitting by David Blight. Yeah, David Blight.
It's a great
Um,
book. Yeah.
yeah,
Fantastic.
Frederick Douglass is sitting in the White House waiting for a meeting with Abraham Lincoln, and he's just sitting there reading a book. And I was like,
It's
that
amazing.
that is, I mean, I'd be so nervous, like I'd be,
Right.
and he's
Yeah.
just like,
Yeah.
I just picture him like, because they said he was in the corner. I just picture him like in the
Sure.
corner, like leg up, like just,
Yeah.
engrossed in a book,
Right. Gosh,
being
yeah.
called at any moment to go in with Abraham Lincoln. Uh,
Yeah.
but that is a superpower. One thing, I mean, I've got these headphones in. One thing that's kind of cheating now is with these AirPods, you can do like noise cancellation. Like I'll do that sometimes too
Oh, sure.
if I'm in a busy area where there's just a lot of noise. For me, if it's a lot of noise, it's not a problem. But if I can hear one conversation, it becomes a problem because then I focus on that. So if I'm in a coffee shop trying to read, I'm good unless I can hear one conversation. Then I'll put in these headphones and just do the noise cancellation thing with some
Sure.
music. But
Yeah.
but other than that, yeah, I being able to and have that flexibility of reading anywhere, it does take practice, but it's a good thing to work towards.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
All right, so number 7, put in the effort to make reading a habit. And so we've been talking about this a lot,
Yeah.
but what are some other things you do to make it a habit?
Yeah. The biggest thing is I've just made an effort to spend way less time on social media. I tend to think, classic like old man thought here, but it's just will rot your brain if you spend too much time on social media. And I've been guilty of it in the past and absolutely recognized it. So I deleted my Twitter account, earlier this year, and that was really great. It was even before Twitter went like crazy with Elon. I was so glad I did it. Um, and even Instagram, like I said, I've curated it to the point where it's just kind of boring after 10 minutes or so. I don't do TikTok. I don't get it. It's just me being a, mid-30s dad is probably part of it. But I think the impulse, right, for most people, morning and night, your morning and evening routines, whether it's, first thing you do in the morning, last thing you do at night, it's tied to your phone. And I think it's just worth asking is if those routines are really fulfilling. Like after you've spent 20 minutes scrolling TikTok at the end of the night, do you feel like happy with how you've spent those 20 minutes? I think if the answer is yes, that's great. But I think what happens is that a lot of people would say no, like I can feel my brain rotting in the moment and I just like can't put my phone down. So I would say like just really ask yourself those questions. Like, are those routines working for you and your, mental and emotional and spiritual health? And if not, then train yourself to read a book instead. And even if you just say, okay, I'm just going to read a book for like 1 minute and then get onto TikTok, odds are you'll keep the book in your hand for a lot longer than that because
Mhm.
books are more entertaining, right? In the long run. And so, yeah, it absolutely takes work and takes willpower at first. But then, like anything, so with any habit, it gets easier as time goes on. And now, like for me, 10 years into doing this, it's just so natural for me to grab a book at the end of the day or first thing in the morning. Even, or for me, right, I tie it to a specific amount of time where I let myself play a couple word games on my phone as the coffee is brewing. But then once the coffee's done and I'm back upstairs in my bed with coffee, then I put the phone down and it's to the book. So if you're able to constrain it a bit, it will really improve your reading life. And again, not to sound like the old man yelling on his porch, but the less you can do social media, I think the better your emotional and mental health will be for sure. So,
Yeah,
and yeah, it's making it a habit as with anything.
yeah. Well, and I think the biggest shocker, um, one of the questions I get most often is how do you find the time to read? And I've got this one blog post on the Books of Titans website where that's the title of the blog is how do you find time to read? And all I
Yeah.
did was just in the body of the thing, I just put the average American watches 4.5 hours of TV a day. And that's all I put in the thing. And
Oh
people,
yeah.
they thought that
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
funny, but it's like,
Absolutely.
you
Yeah.
don't realize how much time you're spending on these things. And not, yeah,
Yeah.
like you keep saying, like it's not that that's bad. And I mean, the numbers for just phone or screen usage is almost double that too. So like if you're thinking,
Yeah. It's
and so
wild.
it's the 4.5 hours of TV is probably not as relevant anymore. It's more like 8 hours of screen
Mm,
time.
yeah.
Um, and so and then the other part of that, like how do you find time to read question? how I like to respond is by asking the same thing. Like, how do you find time to read? Because we're all reading.
Yeah,
And
right.
if you did not read a single book last year, you were reading Twitter, you were reading the news, you were everyone's reading something.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
so you're spending time on that. And so yeah, it's just these kind of like slight shifts. And then I love how you say it just it becomes habit, but it becomes enjoyable too. Like
Mm,
you, I would
yeah,
rather, I mean, my wife and I will watch some shows together and they're entertaining. I still think movies are like the greatest uh release. Just like I love them. I
yeah,
love going to
for
a
sure.
movie. I think it's fantastic, but my mind, I would rather read a book than watch a Netflix series. I would rather
Yeah,
read a book than watch a movie. But I enjoy them, so I do them, and I like watching shows with my wife and stuff. But like, yeah, in general, you kind of get to the point where you it's just natural. You prefer it.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
But
again, it takes more willpower at first, but then you build up the habit of reading it, and it'll be easier and easier to turn the screen off, whichever kind of screen it is.
yeah, yeah, and I still am not good on the social media side of things. Like I'll get sucked into those rabbit holes.
Yeah,
But TV, I think the biggest thing with TV is just not to always have it on. I
yeah,
think
for
if you can
sure.
just make that change, like if that's something that's going on in your house where the news is always on or something's always on, like just even stopping that, like it like frees. I mean, I can't hardly go in anyone's house now where they always have the TV going because it's like it's just
Yeah,
there's so much going on. Like
right. Yeah, I hear
don't do that to
you.
yourself.
For
And so
sure.
yeah, like and the other thing for me, it kind of had to be drastic for me at first because I used to read the news a lot. And then I
Yeah,
just kind of gave that all up. And part of it was just there were so many different uh viewpoints to the same story that I'm not smart enough to determine which was the truth. And I didn't have enough time to like read all the different angles to try to get at the truth. It's almost like
yeah,
you need to wait 15, 20 years and then read a book on what happened
yeah,
where they've got
right.
all the details, like, and still you're not going to get the full story, even that way.
For sure.
Um, and then with TV, it was just, yeah, I almost just had to give it up. It almost had to be a drastic thing at first. And then it just kind of like adjusts and then you start enjoying reading and that sort of thing. But
Yeah,
the key point is everyone has the same number of hours in the day.
yeah,
And
yep,
yes, you're busy, you've got jobs, kids, all these things going on, but we're at like the best time ever in the history of the world to be able to read, whether you can listen to
yeah,
music. So even if you have a huge commute, you can listen to music on the way, or listen to a book on the way. There's so many opportunities. And so yeah, it's a great time to be a reader.
absolutely.
So number 8, you have track your reading. And so tell me
Yeah,
what you do to track it, and then I'll go into what I do.
sure. Yeah. And this is another one of those, it's like it's a really simple tip, and it doesn't even hardly take any amount of time really, but can motivate you to finish more books. So I just have a Google spreadsheet. It's pretty simple. I have columns for date finished, of course, title of the book, author, year it was published, pages. Then I also do some keywords. So whether it's like, World War II or Churchill, just kind of the subject, and then like a little bit of the genre as well. So it's like apocalyptic fiction or classic sci-fi or whatever. And so that then in that spreadsheet, I can just search for keywords if I'm making a list for my newsletter. If someone says, "Hey, do you have any recommendations around this subject?" I can just do a quick, Control F search, and it's super handy to find what I'm looking for. And then I also give it a star rating in my spreadsheet, and I track whether I've covered it in the newsletter and whether I've marked it in Goodreads. So I've, a number of columns, but I've been doing that same thing for, like I said, I think coming up on about a dozen years actually. It's just a different tab for every year. And I remember the first time I hit 100, it was a few years after college. It was like so satisfying, right? We live obviously in like a very quantitative world, right? Where we track everything. And there's some downsides to that, but I think it's also really motivating, right? To just see a number of like, oh, the number of books is ticking up. And so, yeah, once I hit 100, I said, oh, I never want to be below that number again. And so having that like larger goal in mind, seeing the spreadsheet fill up throughout the year, is a ton of fun. So yeah, I would say if you're not tracking your books, whether it's Goodreads or a physical journal, there's a ton of like reading journal specific notebooks out there. Anne Bogle's is one of my favorite. Or whether it's just a simple spreadsheet. I love being able to look through it for past years, and then at the end of each month, I'll pick 2 or 3 titles to highlight the row that was a favorite of the month. And it's like super fun to kind of see a record of your reading, which in many ways for me is almost as powerful as like a classic journal, right? To see what I'm reading, which is then like those books are tied to moments in my life, whether it's, I'll look back and see a title, say, oh, I was reading that like right when my kid was born. I read that on this great vacation. So I think it's super fun, and I definitely am an advocate for everyone tracking their reading. It doesn't take much time, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And I probably go overboard on the tracking, but it's something I enjoy. I mean, I love spreadsheets. There's this one guy I see, he's got a
Yeah.
coffee mug that says, I love spreadsheets.
Oh,
That's me.
sure.
But like, kind of like what you were saying of just knowing where you were in life when you read it.
Yeah.
One suggestion is just this is my everything notebook. I talked about it before, but like I, I, I do everything in here. So I journal in here. I do book notes in here. I do work, meeting notes,
Yeah.
projects. I'll draw out projects that I'm working on design wise and all that. It's my
Sure.
everything notebook, and it usually fits within 1 year. But the power of that is I can look and see, oh wow, I was reading this book when this journal entry was going on, like when this was happening in my life, when I
Yeah.
was, and
Yeah.
even when I was working on these projects at work. So it's just kind of fun to see all that. But yeah, like you, I do a spreadsheet. I just have like an Apple number spreadsheet I use. That is a good idea with Google. Just if other people wanted to look at it or something. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
the columns. I have start date and end date, and then I've got the equation where it just shows how many days it took me, and then
Sure.
I've got another equation where it's based on the days, how many pages per day did I read, and I like to track that just because I'll notice if it's a book I loved, like it's a high page per day count,
Yeah. For
so
sure.
it's kind of fun to see that. So I do the spreadsheet religiously. I have those up on my website if you want to download those and use it yourself. The
Oh,
second
cool.
thing is Goodreads. So yeah, I do Goodreads and just kind of
Yeah.
where I'm at each morning, page wise. But then I also use this app called the Bookly app,
Okay.
and that one I track the time reading. And so anytime I sit down to read, I turn that on,
Oh,
and
sure.
they have a app for the Apple Watch, so you can actually just do it right on your watch or on your
Oh,
phone.
cool. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
when I stop reading, I hit it, and I want to know that, like, how long did it take me to read Don Quixote? It's just I'm curious. And then how does that differ from reading The Count of Monte
Yeah.
Cristo or something? So I want to know, but then I always share that when I talk about the books, because then it gives somebody else an idea of how long it will take them. And I'm a slow reader. I don't speed read or anything like that. So I think the time that I give is pretty indicative of how long it might take someone else to read the book. The last thing I'll mention with the track,
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good idea.
the other thing I'll mention with track your reading is just and it's something you brought up before in the reading in groups part, but this I would say is
Mhm.
probably one of the key features, and it's accountability. And so part of the tracking of the reading
Yeah.
for me is accountability, but also I utilize social media for the accountability aspect as well. Because at the beginning
Yeah.
of each year, I say, I am going to read 52 books this year. Here are the books. Like I've put that out there,
Yeah.
and I don't want to lie. Like I don't want to not do that
For
once I
sure.
put it out there. So
Yeah.
now I've said I want to read 200 of the great books over the next 10 years. Like that's out there now. Like I don't want to not do that. And so just the more type of accountability things you can put into place, I found that to be a huge help to me, especially I mean, I'm around a lot of people now who are big readers, but like when I started off, that wasn't necessarily the case. And so, um, if you don't have people around you that are encouraging you to do it, like
Yeah.
maybe do these other things. And it could even be as simple as like telling your friend, hey, I want to start reading a book a week or a book a month or a
Yeah.
book every 2 months. Like, can you just text me every Friday and just ask me if how I'm doing? Um, the accountability aspect is a huge part of a reading project, or if you're just simply wanting to read more, like get some
Yeah.
sort of accountability going.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and kind of, related to that, just what I say at the bottom of this piece is that reading is a habit, but it's also a skill. Like as you read more, you'll often become faster. You'll pick up on, how books are often structured. You'll be able to compare books to one another a lot easier. So yeah, and in addition to making it a habit, just kind of if you have that mindset that it is actually a skill, and it took me a long time to realize this too. You'll get better at reading, just like you get better at any other skill that you practice. So yeah, I think if you have that frame of mind, you can kind of view it a little differently. So
Yeah. Do you have an overarching purpose or goal to your reading?
gosh, that's a great question. I often think of it. Someone once told me, when we were talking about books, I sort of view it like how you have to eat, roughly 3 meals a day, and you don't necessarily remember like what each meal is composed of or what everything tasted like from years ago or even yesterday, right? But it nourishes you, it fuels your day, right? It kind of keeps you healthy. And I view reading much in the same way. For me, it's what fills me up spiritually and emotionally and mentally, where I'm not necessarily going to remember, every single book that I've read, or even necessarily, people ask me like, oh, what's the best book you read this month? And I have to think about it a little or consult my spreadsheet. But in the end, I view it as like a meal for my brain and my soul, right? Where I just want to keep it constantly fed with stories, with learning about empathy and hearing what people have to say about the world, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. So for me, that's the larger purpose of just like nourishment, kind of period. And then also, it's like it's a little bit of escape. Of course, I think there's some of that, which I think is very healthy when it's in the right doses, right? I think we all need a little escape from real life sometimes, and better to do it in the pages of a book than a lot of other things.
Yeah.
And there's also a bit of like just intellectual curiosity. I've always been a very curious person. I think, after college, I felt like I had this deficit of being able to kind of sate that curiosity. And so reading, like a big history book or biography just helps keep me intellectually curious, which, is something I'm sort of naturally interested in. But also when I think about longevity or ways that, these projects might contribute to what I'm doing at work or in the community, there are often things I'm picking up that I would not have been able to otherwise. So it fulfills, I think, a lot of purposes for me, and I think it can for really everyone too. Reading is not just about entertainment for me, which I think for a lot of people it is, and that's great. But for me, it does a lot of things.
That's cool. And there's an aspect of it too, like even if you go into it of like, I want to go into it to get smarter, so I'm smarter than other people, like
Yeah.
that will flip itself on its head because the more you read,
Oh
the
yeah.
more you realize you don't know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
Absolutely.
it's 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 almost like a noble pursuit in that sense of like you can go
Yeah.
into it for the wrong reasons and all that, but like there's almost a self-correcting mechanism in it. Um to where yeah, it just sparks more curiosity to where
For
you just
sure.
want to read more,
Yeah.
and you kind of go down these rabbit holes and that kind of thing. But then yeah, it just also kind of keeps you in check because there's so much you don't know. And like
Yeah.
I oh
For
yeah,
sure.
and it just helps overall. Like if there's an issue there, I mean there's a lot going on in that issue. It's not just going to be a simple yes or no or black and white. It's like there's a lot going on, and the more you can realize that and kind of approach it that way, I think it's helpful. So
Yeah.
well, cool.
Absolutely.
Any last advice for someone wanting to get going? Maybe they're just like their last book was college and they haven't read since then. They don't even know how to get going.
Yeah.
What
That's
do
a
you
great
say?
question. Yeah, I would say so go pick up any kind of like cheap thriller that you can get your hands on. Something that'll keep the pages turning with a propulsive story. I think is more likely to get you like into reading if you're in a slump than anything else. So if it's John Grisham or Clive Cussler or someone like Tana French even is really fun. So I would say grab some fiction, something with like a really like fast-paced story. Um, and that'll get the reading bug back into you. I think for me, whenever I'm in a reading slump, I go to a murder mystery where like I need to know what happens next, right? And then it kind of gets me back into reading like nothing else does.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, thanks, Jeremy. Loved the article and loved chatting through reading projects and how to go about reading. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for having me. I sure appreciate it, Eric.
Yeah. Yeah.